Jake Torres drifted through the empty darkness of space, alone in his small salvage pod. The cockpit was quiet except for the steady beep of his scanner. He'd been working this sector for 3 years now, pulling apart wrecked ships and selling whatever parts he could find. It wasn't glamorous work, but it paid the bills. His scanner suddenly lit up with a bright red signal. Jake leaned forward, squinting at the display. A Velrothi merchant vessel was out there, and from the looks of it, the ship was dying fast. The readings showed hull breaches, power failures, and atmosphere venting into space. It had maybe 20 minutes before it broke apart completely. Jake's hand hovered over the thruster controls. Every instinct told him to fly away. The Velrothi were a warrior race, tall and powerful like giant cats that walked on 2 legs. They had a reputation across the galaxy for being proud and fierce. They didn't like humans much, and they especially didn't like accepting help from species they considered beneath them. Jake had heard stories of salvagers who tried to rescue Velrothi crews and ended up getting attacked for their trouble. But something made him change course. Maybe it was the way his mom raised him back on Earth, always telling him to help people when they needed it. Maybe it was just stubbornness. Either way, Jake pointed his pod toward the dying ship and hit the thrusters. As he got closer, he could see how bad things really were. The merchant vessel was a mess. Huge gashes ran along its side, and pieces of metal floated away from the hull like leaves in the wind. Scorch marks covered the outer plating. This wasn't an accident. Someone had attacked this ship. Jake maneuvered carefully to the emergency docking port and sealed his pod against it. The magnetic clamps locked with a solid thunk. He grabbed his toolkit and plasma torch, then opened the airlock. The moment he stepped inside the Velrothi ship, he knew he was in trouble. The corridor ahead was twisted and dark. Emergency lights flashed red, making everything look like it was covered in blood. The air smelled like burning circuits and melted plastic. Jake pulled on his respirator and moved forward. His boots crunched on broken glass and debris. Every few seconds the whole ship would shake and groan. Metal screamed against metal somewhere deep in the structure. Jake checked cabin after cabin as he moved through the vessel. Every single room was empty. Not just empty of people but empty of everything. The crew had stripped the place clean before they left. They'd taken food, supplies, equipment, even the bedding. These people had plenty of time to evacuate, and they'd made sure to grab everything valuable. That made Jake angry. If they had time to pack up their belongings, they had time to check the whole ship for survivors. He was about to give up and head back to his pod when he heard something. It was faint at first, just a low rumble that he felt more than heard. Jake followed the sound to the brig, the ship's prison section. The door was sealed, but his plasma torch made quick work of the lock. Inside, Jake stopped dead in his tracks. Chained to the far wall was a Velrothi warrior, and she was huge. She had to be at least 7 feet tall, maybe more. Her fur was midnight black with streaks of silver running through it, like lightning frozen in place. But what caught Jake's attention was the blood. Her left side was torn up bad, shredded by shrapnel or weapons fire. The fur there was matted and dark with dried blood. As Jake stared, her eyes opened. They were amber-colored, like honey held up to sunlight. But right now they were unfocused and cloudy with pain. She tried to move and the chains rattled against the wall. Her lips pulled back, showing sharp fangs, and a weak growl rumbled from her chest. Jake held up both hands, showing he wasn't armed. His heart was pounding so hard he could hear it in his ears. One swipe from those claws could tear him in half, and he was trapped in a small room with her. But she was hurt and dying, and he couldn't just walk away. "Easy there," Jake said, keeping his voice calm and steady. "I'm not here to hurt you. I'm getting you out of here." She snarled again, but there wasn't much strength behind it. Her head drooped forward, and Jake realized she was barely conscious. He moved quickly, firing up his plasma torch. The reinforced chains were thick, designed to hold someone with Velrothi strength. It took precious minutes to cut through them, and the whole time Jake could feel the ship falling apart around them. The floor tilted at a weird angle. The groaning of stressed metal got louder and more frequent. When the last chain snapped free, the Velrothi warrior slumped forward. Jake barely caught her before she hit the floor. She was dead weight, and he wasn't kidding when he guessed 400 pounds. She was solid muscle under all that fur. Jake grunted and shifted her weight, getting her draped across his shoulders in a fireman's carry. His legs nearly buckled. She was so heavy that each step felt like he was walking through mud. Jake's muscles screamed at him as he staggered back through the corridor. The ship wasn't just groaning anymore. It was screaming. Somewhere behind him, bulkheads were collapsing. The artificial gravity flickered on and off, making him stumble. Alarms blared from every speaker, a high-pitched wail that made his teeth hurt. Red emergency lights flashed faster and faster. Jake's respirator fogged up from his heavy breathing. Sweat ran down his face and stung his eyes. His shoulders felt like they were on fire from the weight, and his back wasn't much better. But he kept moving, one foot in front of the other. He could see his pod ahead, the airlock still open and waiting. Just 50 more feet. 40. 30. Behind him, a massive explosion shook the entire vessel. Jake was thrown forward, crashing through the airlock with the Velrothi warrior still on his shoulders. He slammed his fist on the emergency release, and the airlock door sealed shut. Jake dragged himself to the pilot's seat and punched the undocking sequence. The magnetic clamps released with a hiss. He fired the thrusters, and his pod shot away from the dying ship just as the main reactor gave out. Through the viewport, Jake watched the Velrothi merchant vessel fold in on itself like a crushed can. Fire bloomed briefly in the vacuum before the oxygen burned away. The whole thing tumbled down toward the planet below, a massive world covered in green acidic oceans. The ship hit the atmosphere and burned up in seconds, leaving nothing but a streak of light. Then even that was gone, swallowed by the poisonous green mist. Jake sat there for a long moment, gasping for breath. His whole body hurt. His muscles felt like jelly. The Velrothi warrior lay in his cargo bay, still unconscious, blood slowly pooling on his floor. He had no idea if she'd even survive. He had no idea how to treat injuries on a Velrothi. He had no idea if she'd thank him or try to kill him when she woke up. Jake leaned back in his seat and let out a shaky laugh. "Well," he muttered to the empty cockpit, "this is gonna be interesting." He set course back to his salvage station and hoped he'd made the right choice. 3 days passed before the Velrothi warrior finally opened her eyes. Jake had been working in his small workshop, sparks flying from his welding torch as he tried to patch together a damaged circuit board. The station was old and constantly breaking down, so there was always something that needed fixing. He was so focused on his work that he almost didn't hear the loud crash coming from the medical bay. Jake dropped his torch and spun around. His heart jumped into his throat when he saw her standing there in the doorway. The Velrothi warrior was on her feet, though she was swaying like a tree in a strong wind. One of her massive clawed hands gripped the edge of his workbench so hard that the metal was bending under her fingers. Her amber eyes found him immediately, and Jake felt like a mouse being watched by a very large, very angry cat. "Where am I?" Her voice came out as a deep rasp, rough like gravel. "Where is my crew?" Jake carefully set down his welding torch, making sure his movements were slow and non-threatening. The last thing he wanted was to startle a 7-foot-tall predator who looked ready to tear something apart. "You're on salvage station 47, he said, trying to keep his voice steady. "This is my station. Just me out here." "My crew," she repeated, her voice getting harder. "Where are they?" Jake took a breath. This wasn't going to be easy to hear. "Your crew abandoned you. They left you chained up in that brig when the raiders attacked their ship. I found you there right before the whole thing fell apart." The effect was immediate. Her ears, which had been standing up straight, suddenly flattened back against her skull. Her lips pulled back from her fangs and a low growl started deep in her chest. "That is a lie," she snarled. "My crew would never abandon a warrior. You are lying to me, human." Jake had expected this reaction. He'd spent the last 3 days thinking about how this conversation would go, and he knew she wouldn't want to believe the truth. "I'm not lying," he said quietly. "I pulled the black box recorder from your ship before it went down. I've got all the security footage and audio logs saved on my terminal." He pointed toward the computer screen on the far wall. "I can show you everything if you want to see it. But first you really need to sit down. Those stitches on your side are fresh, and if you keep moving around like this, you're gonna tear them open." She looked down at herself for the first time, seeming to notice the bandages wrapped around her torso. Her hand moved to touch the white fabric, and Jake could see confusion spreading across her feline features. Her ears came up slightly, no longer flat against her head. "You did this?" she asked, her voice losing some of its angry edge. "You tended to my wounds?" "Yeah," Jake said with a small shrug. "You were in pretty bad shape when I got you back here. Took me about 6 hours to stop the bleeding and patch up all the damage. Wasn't gonna just let you bleed out on my floor after I went through all that trouble hauling you off that wreck." The Velrothi warrior stood there, staring at him like he'd just said something in a language she didn't understand. "I am Velrothi," she said slowly, and Jake could hear both pride and confusion in her voice. "My kind and yours are not allies. We are barely even on speaking terms in most sectors. Why would you save me?" Jake had been asked that question by himself about 100 times over the last 3 days. He'd spent hours wondering if he'd made a huge mistake, if this warrior would wake up and kill him the moment she had her strength back. But his answer hadn't changed. "You needed help," he said simply. "That's all that mattered to me. Didn't really care what species you were or what kind of politics were involved. You were dying and I could do something about it, so I did." For a long moment, the Velrothi just stared at him. Her amber eyes searched his face like she was trying to find the trick, the hidden angle, the real reason he'd done what he did. Jake just stood there and let her look. He had nothing to hide. Finally, slowly, she moved away from the workbench and lowered herself into the large chair Jake had dragged into the workshop for her. It creaked under her weight but held. She winced as she sat, one hand going back to her bandaged side. "I am Kira," she said, her voice formal now. "Warrior of the 3rd Fleet, trained in combat and engineering, sworn to protect Velrothi interests across the sector." She paused, and her eyes locked onto his with an intensity that made Jake want to step back. "I owe you a life debt, human." "Name's Jake," he replied. "Jake Torres. And you don't owe me anything, really. I was just doing what anyone should do." Kira's ears flicked forward, and she shook her head firmly. "Among my people, a life debt is sacred," she said, and Jake could hear the absolute certainty in her voice. "It is one of our oldest traditions going back thousands of years. When someone saves your life, you are bound to them until that debt is repaid. It is a matter of honor, and honor is everything to the Velrothi. I will not dishonor myself or my family by ignoring this debt. I am bound to you now, Jake Torres, until I have repaid what I owe." Jake ran his hand through his hair, suddenly feeling very awkward. He'd heard about Velrothi honor codes before, but he'd always thought they were just stories, exaggerations that traders told in bars. "Okay," he said slowly. "If it's that important to you, then sure. You can stick around and help out. The environmental systems on this station have been acting up for weeks now. The temperature keeps fluctuating and I can't figure out what's wrong with the climate controls. If you're really an engineer like you said, maybe you could take a look at that." Kira's ears perked straight up and her eyes went wide. For the first time since she'd woken up, she looked genuinely surprised. "That is all you ask?" she said, disbelief clear in her voice. "You saved my life, pulled me from certain death, tended my wounds for 3 days, and all you want is help fixing your environmental systems?" "Well, yeah," Jake said, feeling a bit confused himself now. "I mean, it's been getting pretty cold at night and I'd really like to fix that before winter simulation kicks in." What did you think I was gonna ask for?" Kira just sat there, shaking her head slowly. Her tail, which Jake had barely noticed before, swished back and forth behind her. "In my culture, a life debt can be called upon for anything," she explained. "Warriors have used their life debts to command others into battle, to demand fortunes, to require years of service. You could ask me to fight your enemies, to give you everything I own, to serve you for the rest of my life." She paused. "And you ask for help with temperature control?" Jake shrugged. "I'm not really into the whole commanding people thing. Just need some help keeping this old station running. Besides, you're still recovering. Can't have you fighting battles or doing hard labor when you're hurt." Kira stared at him for another long moment. Then, slowly, something that might have been a smile crossed her feline features. "These humans," she muttered, more to herself than to Jake. "These strange, impossible humans. Nothing about your kind makes any sense at all." But she stood up, slowly and carefully, and walked over to where Jake kept his tools. "Show me these environmental systems," she said. "If I am to repay this debt, I might as well start now. And perhaps, while we work, you can show me that black box footage. I need to see the truth of what happened to my crew." Jake nodded and grabbed his tablet. As they walked toward the climate control room, he couldn't help but feel like his quiet, lonely life on this salvage station was about to get a whole lot more interesting. The weeks that followed changed everything Jake thought he knew about the Velrothi. At first, he'd expected Kira to be all about fighting and warrior traditions. That's what everyone said about her species. They were soldiers, combat specialists, the kind of aliens you didn't want to meet in a dark corridor. But as they worked together on the station, Jake discovered something that surprised him. Kira wasn't just a warrior. She was one of the smartest engineers he'd ever met. She knew Velrothi military systems inside and out, sure, but her knowledge went way beyond that. She understood power distribution, life support mechanics, navigation systems, and a dozen other technical fields. Within the first week, she diagnosed problems with the station that Jake had been struggling with for months. Together they started fixing things. Not just patching them up temporarily, but really fixing them properly. The old salvage station began to transform. Systems that had been failing for years suddenly worked like new. The lights stopped flickering. The water recycler stopped making that horrible grinding noise. The airlock sealed properly for the first time since Jake had bought the place. It was like watching a dying plant come back to life. One afternoon, Jake was working on the coolant system in the main engine room. The thing had been overheating constantly, and he'd finally figured out a solution. It wasn't a normal solution though. He'd pulled parts from 4 different alien technologies and was trying to make them all work together. There were Velrothi cooling coils, human temperature sensors, KRYL pressure valves, and some weird crystalline components from a species he couldn't even pronounce. Kira stood behind him, watching with her arms crossed. "Your methods are completely chaotic," she said, and Jake could hear the disbelief in her voice. "There is no order to what you are doing. No system. No protocol." Jake grinned as he spliced together 2 cables that definitely weren't designed to connect. "I prefer to call it creative," he said. "Protocol is just another word for boring. By Velrothi engineering standards, this should not function," Kira continued, shaking her head. "These components are not compatible. The power requirements are different. The connection interfaces do not match. This is wrong in at least 7 different ways." Jake finished the last connection and stepped back. "Well, let's see if wrong works." He hit the activation switch. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the system hummed to life with a smooth, steady sound. The temperature gauges on the wall all stabilized, dropping into the green zone. Cool air began flowing through the vents. Jake turned to Kira and winked. "And yet here we are. Working perfectly." Kira's tail swished back and forth, and Jake had learned over the past few weeks that this meant she was amused. "Perhaps there is wisdom in chaos after all," she admitted. "You humans have a gift for making impossible things work. It is frustrating and impressive at the same time." As the station improved, word began to spread through the sector. A human and a Velrothi working together. Living on the same station. Actually cooperating instead of fighting or ignoring each other. It was unusual enough that people started talking. Traders mentioned it at ports. Salvagers gossiped about it over drinks. The news spread from station to station, ship to ship. Most of that attention was just curiosity. But some of it was darker. The Caruelo pirates showed up on a Tuesday morning without any warning. Jake's sensors suddenly lit up with 6 ships dropping out of faster-than-light travel right on top of his station. They were ugly vessels, all mismatched parts and weapons bolted onto every available surface. Pirate ships always looked like that, thrown together from stolen parts in desperation. The communication system crackled to life, and a rough voice filled Jake's cockpit. "Human," the voice said, dripping with confidence. "We know you have cargo on that station. We also know you have a Velrothi warrior with you. Here is our offer. You surrender everything you have, including the Velrothi, and we let you live. You get to walk away with your life. That is generous. You have 2 minutes to decide." Jake looked over at Kira, who was already standing at the weapons locker. She was pulling out a plasma rifle and checking its charge level. Her ears were flat against her head, and he could see her fangs showing. She looked ready for war. "Not gonna happen," Jake said into the comm, his voice calm and steady. Then he switched it off and started pulling on his combat gear. The pirates cut through the outer airlock about 10 minutes later. Jake counted 8 of them in the first boarding party. They were Caruel, a species that looked like walking lizards with too many teeth. They carried heavy weapons and wore mismatched armor. They moved into the station with the confidence of people who'd done this 100 times before. They were expecting an easy fight. 1 human and 1 injured Velrothi against 8 armed pirates. The odds seemed obvious. They were very, very wrong. Jake fought the way humans always fought when their backs were against the wall. There was no honor in it, no formal combat style, no rules. He used every dirty trick he'd ever learned. He threw tools at their heads to distract them. He vented atmosphere in corridors to knock them off balance. He cut power to sections of the station to create darkness, then attacked from the shadows. He rigged doors to slam shut at the wrong moment. He even dumped cooking oil on the floor in one hallway and watched 3 pirates slip and crash into each other. Kira fought like something out of a nightmare. She moved with lethal grace, her body flowing from one attack to the next like a deadly dance. Her claws ripped through armor. Her strength let her throw pirates across rooms. Her speed made her almost impossible to track. She was everything the galaxy feared about Velrothi warriors, all that power and skill focused into pure combat effectiveness. But it was when they fought together that things got really dangerous for the pirates. Jake would create chaos and confusion, and Kira would strike in that moment of disorder. Kira would draw attention and enemy fire, and Jake would hit them from an unexpected angle. They didn't plan it or discuss it. It just happened naturally, like they'd been fighting together for years instead of weeks. The battle lasted 20 minutes. When it was over, 5 pirates were unconscious on the floor, 2 were trapped behind sealed doors begging to be let out, and 1 was running back to his ship as fast as his legs could carry him. The pirate vessels detached from the station and jumped back into faster-than-light travel, leaving their crew behind. Jake stood in the main corridor breathing hard. His shirt was torn and he had a cut over his left eye that stung. Kira was next to him, blood streaking her black fur. Some of it was hers but most of it wasn't. She was looking at him with an expression Jake had never seen before. Her amber eyes gleamed with something that looked like respect. "You fight without honor," she said, and there was no criticism in her voice. Just observation. "You use tricks and deception. You bend every rule of combat. You do not fight fair." Jake laughed, still trying to catch his breath. "Fair fights are for people who want to lose. I fight to win. I fight to survive." Kira's tail swished again, and this time Jake saw what might have been approval in her eyes. "I am beginning to understand why the galaxy fears humanity," she said quietly. "It is not your strength or your technology. It is this. Your refusal to give up. Your willingness to do whatever it takes." "We're not scary," Jake said, wiping blood from his forehead. "We're just stubborn. Really, really stubborn." "Yes," Kira agreed, and now she was definitely smiling. "Stubbornly impossible to kill. The galaxy has rules for warfare, codes of conduct, honorable ways to fight. Humans ignore all of that and simply refuse to die." She paused. "It is terrifying. And I am glad you are on my side." Jake grinned despite his exhaustion. "Yeah, well, you're not so bad yourself. For a giant space cat." Kira's laugh was a deep rumble that echoed through the corridor. Together they started cleaning up the mess and securing the captured pirates. The station was safe. They were alive. And somehow, impossibly, they made a pretty good team. The Velrothi military arrived exactly 4 weeks after the pirate attack. Jake was running a diagnostic on the navigation array when his sensors went crazy. Multiple ships dropping out of faster-than-light travel, all at once, in perfect formation. These weren't pirates or traders. These were military vessels, sleek and deadly, with weapon systems that could turn his small station into dust in seconds. Within minutes, his station was completely surrounded. There was no escape route, no way to run even if he'd wanted to. Jake's hands hovered over the controls, but he knew there was nothing he could do. 6 warships against 1 salvage station wasn't a fight. It was an execution waiting to happen. The communication system activated without Jake even touching it. They'd overridden his controls remotely. A stern voice filled the station, cold and authoritative. "This is Commander Theron of the 3rd Fleet. We are here for the warrior Kira. You will surrender her to us immediately. You have 3 minutes to comply." Jake looked over at Kira, who had gone completely still. Her fur was standing on end, bristling like she'd been shocked with electricity. Her ears were flat against her skull, and her tail had gone rigid. "Theron," she said quietly, and Jake heard something in her voice he'd never heard before. Fear mixed with anger. "That is my former commander." Jake stood up and moved to stand beside her. His heart was pounding but his voice came out steady. "She's not going anywhere she doesn't want to go," he said loudly enough for the communication system to pick up. There was a pause. Then a bright light filled the station's docking bay, and 6 figures materialized out of thin air. Teleportation technology. Military grade. Jake had heard about it but never seen it in person. The 6 Velrothi warriors stood in perfect formation, all of them armed and armored. They made Kira look small, even though she was 7 feet tall herself. The one in front was clearly the commander. He had silver fur streaked with old scars, and his amber eyes were cold as ice. Commander Theron looked at Kira like she was something disgusting he'd found on the bottom of his boot. "Warrior Kira," he said, his voice dripping with contempt. "You dishonor us all by accepting rescue from a human. You dishonor your training, your fleet, and every warrior who served beside you. You will return with us now to face charges for your crimes." "Crimes?" Jake stepped forward, anger burning in his chest. "What crimes? She didn't do anything wrong. She survived. That's not a crime." Theron's cold eyes shifted to Jake, and the commander looked at him the way someone might look at an annoying insect. "She survived when she should have died with honor," he said slowly, like he was explaining something to a child. "She accepted help from a lesser species, from humans, when she should have refused and died as a warrior. She has. Lesser." Jake's voice went quiet, but there was something dangerous in it now. Something that made even the Velrothi warriors shift uncomfortably. "You want to talk about honor, Commander? About what's right and wrong? Let me show you something." Jake walked to his main computer terminal and pulled up the files he'd recovered from the black box recorder. The one he'd saved from Kira's merchant vessel before it fell into the acid ocean. His fingers moved across the controls, and the main screen lit up with video footage. The Velrothi delegation watched in complete silence. The footage showed the interior of the merchant vessel during the attack. Alarms were blaring. The crew was running through corridors, grabbing supplies, packing equipment. They had plenty of time. Nobody was panicking. They were evacuating in an organized way, loading cargo and personal belongings onto escape pods. Then the audio picked up a voice giving orders. It was Commander Theron's voice, unmistakable and clear. "What about the prisoner in the brig?" someone asked. "She is dead weight," Theron's voice replied coldly. "Leave her. Seal the section and move on. We need to save the cargo." The footage continued. It showed crew members sealing the corridor that led to the brig. Showed them boarding the escape pods and launching. Showed the merchant vessel being left behind, empty except for one warrior chained in the darkness. When the video ended, the silence in the station was absolute. Jake looked at the Velrothi warriors and saw their reactions. Every single one of them had their ears flattened against their skulls. Their tails were lashing back and forth in agitation. Two of them had their claws extended, digging into their palms. In Velrothi culture, abandoning a wounded comrade was the worst thing a warrior could do. It was the deepest dishonor imaginable, worse than running from battle, worse than losing a fight. Commander Theron's eyes had gone wide. His mouth opened but no sound came out. "The truth," Jake said, his voice cutting through the silence like a knife. "You left her to die, Commander. You abandoned a warrior under your command to save some cargo. You chained her up and left her on a sinking ship. I saved her. I pulled her out of that wreck and patched up her wounds and gave her a place to recover. And now you have the nerve to come here and tell me she's the one without honor?" One of the younger warriors stepped forward, his voice shaking with barely controlled rage. "Commander Theron, by the ancient codes of our people, you are forsworn. You have no honor. You have no right to command warriors or speak of tradition." Theron's hand moved to the weapon at his side, fast as lightning. The other warriors tensed, ready for violence. Jake could feel the situation about to explode into bloodshed. One wrong word, one wrong move, and people were going to die. Jake didn't flinch. He looked Commander Theron right in the eyes and spoke quietly. "You can try to take her by force if you want. You've got the weapons and the ships. But ask yourself something first, Commander. Is that really the warrior way? Using superior numbers to cover up your own mistakes? Or are you just trying to hide your cowardice by punishing someone else?" The tension in the room was so thick Jake could barely breathe. Theron's hand stayed on his weapon. His eyes burned with rage and shame and fear all mixed together. The other warriors were watching their commander, waiting to see what he would do. Then Jake did something that nobody expected. Something that went against every tactical instinct, every survival reflex. He took a breath and spoke again, and his voice was calm and quiet. "Leave," he said simply. "Just go. Walk away. I won't report any of this to the Galactic Council. Kira won't press charges against you or your crew. What happened on that merchant vessel, what you did, that's between you and your conscience. But you don't get to punish her for surviving. You don't get to call her dishonorable when you're the one who left her to die. So just leave. Go away and try to be better. Try to be the kind of commander who doesn't abandon their people. Mercy for an enemy. Forgiveness for someone who'd committed betrayal." The concept was so completely alien to Velrothi culture that several of the warriors actually took a step backward in shock. Their ears came up, their eyes went wide. They looked at Jake like he'd just done magic, like he'd broken the laws of physics. In Velrothi society, dishonor was answered with violence or exile. Betrayal was answered with death or public shame. There was no forgiveness, no second chances, no mercy. Justice was absolute and harsh. But here was this human, offering something they'd never even considered. A chance to walk away. A chance to be better. Commander Theron stared at Jake for a long moment. Something moved behind his eyes, something that might have been shame or gratitude or confusion. Then, without saying a single word, he turned and walked back to the teleportation point. The light surrounded him and he vanished. The other warriors looked at each other, uncertain. One by one they followed their commander. The youngest warrior paused before he left and looked at Kira. "Warrior Kira," he said formally, "you have more honor than any of us. I am sorry for what was done to you." Then he was gone too. Jake stood there in the empty docking bay, his legs shaking now that the danger had passed. Kira moved beside him, and when he looked at her, he saw something he'd never seen before. Tears in her amber eyes. You gave him mercy, she said softly. After everything he did. After he tried to take me away and punish me for his crimes. You gave him a chance to walk away with dignity. Jake shrugged, suddenly feeling very tired. Everyone deserves a chance to be better. Even cowards. Maybe especially cowards. Kira shook her head slowly. My people do not think this way. We do not forgive. We do not show mercy to those who betray us. She paused. Perhaps that is why we need humans in this galaxy. To teach us things we have forgotten. Or maybe things we never knew at all. Kira stood at the large viewport in the station's observation deck long after the Velrothi military ships had jumped away into faster-than-light travel. The stars stretched out before her, endless points of light in the darkness. She'd been standing there for almost an hour just watching and thinking. Her reflection in the glass showed a warrior who looked different somehow, changed by everything that had happened. Jake finally found her there as the station's artificial night cycle was beginning. He walked up quietly and stood beside her at the window, looking out at the same stars. For a while neither of them said anything. The silence between them was comfortable, the kind that only exists between people who've been through something difficult together. You gave him mercy, Kira said softly, still looking at the stars. After everything Commander Theron did. After he abandoned me, tried to arrest me, threatened you. You gave him a chance to leave with some dignity. Why? Jake leaned against the viewport frame and thought about his answer. Because everyone deserves a chance to be better, he said finally. Even cowards. Maybe especially cowards. Theron made terrible choices, but that doesn't mean he can't make better ones in the future. Crushing him completely wouldn't fix anything. It would just create more anger and more problems down the line. Kira turned to look at him, her amber eyes searching his face. This is not the human way I was taught, she said, and there was confusion in her voice. My people told us that humans were weak and selfish. That you only cared about profit and your own survival. That you would betray anyone if the price was right. But you are nothing like that. You saved me expecting nothing. You showed mercy to an enemy. You risked everything for someone you barely knew. Jake smiled a little. Yeah, well, we're full of surprises. Humans, I mean. We're not perfect. There are plenty of selfish humans out there, plenty of greedy ones. But most of us, deep down, we just want to help. We want to make things better. It's kind of built into us, I think. We see someone suffering and we can't just walk away. Kira was quiet for another long moment. Then she straightened up to her full height and turned to face Jake directly. My life debt is paid, she said formally. By the ancient codes of my people, I have repaid what I owed you. I'm free now. I can return to my people, find a new fleet to serve with, continue my life as a warrior. Jake felt something sink in his chest, but he kept his face neutral. Okay, he said. I understand. If you want to go back to your people, I won't stop you. You've been a huge help here, but I know this isn't the life you signed up for. Kira's ears flicked forward, and something that might have been amusement crossed her features. I am not finished speaking, Jake Torres, she said. Yes, I am free to return. But I choose to stay. If you will have me as a partner. Not as someone repaying a debt, but as an equal. A true partner in whatever we build here. Jake blinked in surprise. Then a genuine smile spread across his face. The kind that reached his eyes. Partner? He extended his hand toward her. I really like the sound of that. Kira reached out and gripped his hand in her massive paw. Her claws were carefully retracted so she wouldn't accidentally hurt him. They shook on it, sealing the deal in the simple human way. But Jake could see that for Kira this handshake meant everything. She was choosing to stay not because honor demanded it but because she wanted to. Over the following months they built something completely unique. The first human Velrothi rescue and salvage operation in neutral space. They painted the station's identification markers with both human and Velrothi symbols. They upgraded the equipment, expanded the medical bay and reinforced the defensive systems. But more importantly, they established a reputation. They didn't discriminate based on species or politics. They didn't ask questions about why someone needed help. They didn't demand payment from people who clearly couldn't afford it. They just saved lives. When a distress call came in, they went. It didn't matter if it was a human ship or Velrothi or KRYL or any of the hundreds of other species in the galaxy. If someone needed help, Jake and Kira were there. Word spread quickly through the shipping lanes and trading posts. Stories were told in bars and cargo holds across the sector. A human and a Velrothi working together, saving anyone who needed it, asking for nothing in return. It was unusual enough to attract attention. Other Velrothi started showing up at the station. At first, they came out of curiosity. They wanted to see the human who'd shown mercy to an enemy, who'd saved a Velrothi warrior and asked only for help fixing his heating system. But they stayed because of what they learned there. They learned that compassion wasn't weakness. They learned that helping others didn't require a reward or recognition. They learned that every life had value regardless of species or status. These were concepts that challenged everything Velrothi culture had taught them, and it changed how they saw the galaxy. 3 years passed. The small salvage station became something of a landmark in neutral space. Ships would go out of their way to pass by it, just to see the place where everything had started. Jake and Kira saved hundreds of lives in those 3 years. They pulled people from dying ships, rescued stranded crews, provided medical care and supplies to those who needed it. Then humanity formally petitioned for full membership in the Galactic Council. It was a big deal. Humans had been trading and traveling through the galaxy for decades, but they'd always been considered a minor species. Not quite trusted, not quite respected. The council debate went on for weeks, with species arguing both for and against human membership. That's when Kira made her decision. She traveled to the council homeworld and requested to speak before the full assembly as an advocate for humanity. When the day came, she stood in the massive chamber before representatives from hundreds of worlds. The room was designed to be intimidating, with high ceilings and the delegates looking down from elevated platforms. But Kira had faced worse than intimidating rooms. "I was left to die by my own people," she began, her voice strong and clear, carrying through the enormous chamber. "My commander ordered the crew to abandon me on a sinking ship. They chained me in the dark and flew away. A human named Jake Torres risked his life to save me. He expected nothing in return. Not gratitude. Not payment. Not even acknowledgement. He saved me simply because, to humans, leaving someone to die is unthinkable." She paused and looked directly at the council members, making eye contact with as many as she could. "You are debating whether humanity is ready to join this council. Whether they are civilized enough, advanced enough, trustworthy enough. I say this to you, humans don't save people because it's logical or profitable. They don't calculate risk versus reward before offering help. They do it because they cannot accept that any life is expendable. Every species in this chamber operates on calculated decisions. Humans operate on something else entirely. An irrational, stubborn belief that everyone deserves a chance. That every life matters." Kira's tail swished slowly behind her, a sign of her conviction. The galaxy needs that irrationality. The galaxy needs that stubbornness. The galaxy needs humanity and everything they represent. They will make us better. They will remind us why we formed this council in the first place. Not for profit or power, but to protect life and promote cooperation. The vote came 3 hours later. It was unanimous. Every single species voted to grant humanity full council membership. Back on Station 47, Jake sat in his worn pilot chair with a cold beer in his hand, watching the news feed on his screen. The reporter was talking about the historic vote, about humanity's new place in galactic politics. Jake took a sip of his beer and smiled. Kira settled into the large chair beside him, the one they'd reinforced specifically for her weight. Her massive form somehow fit perfectly in the cramped space they'd turned into home. "Think they know what they're getting into?" Jake asked, gesturing at the screen. "The council, I mean. Do they really understand what it means to have humans as full members?" Kira's laugh was a deep rumble that Jake could feel through the floor. "Not even slightly," she said. "But they will learn. Just like I did." "Good." Jake grinned and finished his beer. "Let's keep surprising them." Outside the viewport, the stars continued their eternal dance. And then, right on schedule, a new distress beacon blinked to life in the darkness. Red light pulsing, emergency frequency, someone out there who needed help. Jake and Kira looked at each other for just a moment. No words were needed. They both stood up at the same time and headed for the pod bay, grabbing their gear as they went. The beer was left forgotten on the console. The news feed kept playing to an empty room. There was work to do. There was always work to do. And that was exactly how they liked it,